AI work on this and try to break it down into pronouns, nouns, verbs, or whatever they're using.
What if the Garden of Eden story you've always been told was only half the truth? No snake, no apple, just radiant beings from a realm of light shaping humanity from the very start. And the texts that revealed this, buried, banned, hidden from the world. But now, AI has begun to unlock what was never meant to be seen. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some scriptures were never allowed in your Bible. And it seems Joe Rogan might even agree with that. Forbidden texts hidden from the Bible. There's a reason certain books were never placed alongside Genesis and Revelation. A reason why some scriptures were locked in monasteries, buried in deserts, or handed down in secret, written in languages only a few could read. The Book of Adam and Eve, sometimes called the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, is one of those texts. It didn't disappear because it wasn't important. Quite the opposite. First appearing in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, this mysterious manuscript likely dates from between the 3rd and 5th centuries AD. It survived centuries of obscurity, copied by Christian monks, and later translated into Latin, Slavonic, and Arabic. Yet, despite its clear link to Genesis, it was left out of the canonized Bible. And that omission wasn't by accident. This book doesn't just retell the Garden of Eden story, it completely reframes it. Instead of ending with Adam and Eve's banishment, it picks up after the fall, describing in vivid, almost mystical detail their trials, torments, and direct encounters with strange supernatural beings. It's not just theology. It's myth, horror, cosmic drama, and maybe, just maybe, something deeper. What makes this so fascinating is how different cultures preserved it differently. While the Western world mostly ignored it, Ethiopian Christians treated it as spiritual truth. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church even kept it among their sacred texts for generations, suggesting it carried deeper, more accepted meaning in African Christianity than in Europe. Priests of the Ethiopian Church are said to guard it carefully. So why did other churches abandon it? When the Church standardized Scripture during gatherings like the Council of Carthage in 397 AD, they decided what was divinely inspired and what wasn't. Any text with ambiguous theology, conflicting timelines, or too much mysticism was excluded. That included writings showing Satan not just as a tempter, but as an active cosmic enemy, battling Adam. The Book of Adam and Eve didn't fit the polished story the Church wanted. It was too raw, too strange, too speculative. Some scholars call it close to heresy. Others argue it revealed truths the Church wasn't ready to face. Here's another curious fact. Versions of this story were found in ancient monastic libraries across the Middle East, Armenia, and even in Slavic manuscripts in Eastern Europe. Each version has small tweaks reflecting local beliefs, but the central mystery remains the same. These weren't fringe texts. They were preserved, copied, and shared, just not publicly. What's even more striking is how the language in the Book of Adam and Eve, references to light from the realm above and watchers from the sky, mirrors terms in other forbidden texts like the Book of Enoch or certain Dead Sea Scroll fragments. This points to a cross-pollination of ideas among early apocalyptic and mystical Jewish Christian writers. And here's the kicker. These texts don't show Adam and Eve as passive. They are aware, distressed, even rebellious at times. They cry out to God. They fast. They build altars. They fight evil. This story isn't about simple punishment. It's about survival in a corrupted world. In one chilling scene, Adam is led by Satan to a mountaintop and thrown down a cliff. In another, Eve is tricked by a dark angel disguised in radiant light. These aren't stories for children. They're cosmic, terrifying, and deeply symbolic. And perhaps that's why the book was hidden. Not because it lacked value, but because it contained too much. No snake, no apple, just beings from the bright realm. Forget everything you thought you knew about the Garden of Eden. In the book of Adam and Eve, the infamous talking snake doesn't even exist, not in the way most people imagine. In these forgotten texts, the tempter's role is far stranger, celestial beings from a so-called bright realm. Some call them the Shining Ones. One of the eeriest differences in this version is how temptation unfolds. Instead of a sly serpent coiled around a tree, we see radiant figures, beautiful, glowing, and commanding. In several chapters, these beings appear to Adam and Eve as angels. But they're not angels of comfort. They lie, they trick, they deceive. In one scene, a being of light tells Adam that God has abandoned him, that heaven has no place for a failed creation. The language isn't evil, it's loving, persuasive, almost divine. But the intentions are clearly sinister. These aren't your Sunday school angels. They're manipulative, mysterious, maybe even alien in nature. The term bright realm shows up repeatedly in translations. In Ethiopian versions, it's described as a place of pure light, high above earth, where powerful beings reside. How should we perceive that force? Is it just energy, or should we anthropomorphize it? Not all these beings answer to God. Some scholars see echoes of this in other ancient texts, like the Book of Enoch's Watchers or Mesopotamian myths of gods descending from the heavens to interact with humanity. Could this hint at something more, something otherworldly? A particularly bizarre theory from fringe researchers. The beings from the bright realm weren't symbolic at all. They were literal extraterrestrials. From this perspective, the Book of Adam and Eve is less about sin and more about humanity's first contact. That's why there's no snake, just entities interfering with Earth's first couple in ways they didn't fully grasp. Even dismissing that theory, the imagery is striking. Adam and Eve are described as being overwhelmed by blinding light, sudden shifts in atmosphere, and strange sensations whenever these beings appear. We know both those things, light and strange phenomena, exist, but we don't know their origin. Are angels and demons real? These accounts are reminiscent of ancient UFO sightings or religious visions across cultures. And the most intriguing part? These bright beings never outright claim to be evil. They promise knowledge, power, freedom. Sound familiar? It mirrors the serpent in Genesis, but here it comes clothed in robes of light instead of scales and hissing. In another version, Satan himself takes the form of a radiant angel, mocking Adam from a cloud above. This shape-shifting, appearing as light, is even referenced in the New Testament. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. That verse makes far more sense after reading this book. And the idea that Eden wasn't just about disobedience, but a cosmic test involving unknown powers, changes everything. Was Earth always a battleground? Were Adam and Eve the first test subjects? Or worse, were they never meant to succeed? These unsettling reinterpretations make the Book of Adam and Eve one of the most controversial ancient texts ever found. AI tools have now helped decode lost portions. For centuries, the full story remained fractured, buried in damaged scrolls, faded translations, or hidden across obscure religious libraries in Ethiopia, Armenia, and Eastern Europe. Even surviving copies were incomplete, riddled with missing lines, corrupted syntax, and centuries of scribal errors. Scholars tried for decades to piece the puzzle together, but something was always missing. Then AI stepped in. Over the past few years, a quiet revolution has been happening in the world of ancient texts. Teams from institutions like Oxford University, in collaboration with Google's DeepMind, have been using machine learning to help decode, restore, and contextualize long-lost historical documents. The artificial intelligence that powers Ithaca is based on cutting-edge technology developed at Google's DeepMind. One of their most groundbreaking tools is called Ithaca, an AI trained to read damaged or fragmentary ancient scripts and suggest accurate restorations, even identifying their possible locations and dates of origin. Originally tested on Greek inscriptions, Ithaca stunned scholars when it began predicting missing words and context with up to 72% accuracy, far beyond anything ever achieved manually. Ithaca's networks replicate some of the work done by historians, analyzing what an inscription says to fill in missing words. But it didn't stop there. Scholars began training similar models on lesser-known languages like Ge'ez, Syriac, and Coptic, the very scripts in which the Book of Adam and Eve and related apocryphal texts were preserved. As a result, AI began to breathe life back into texts long considered broken beyond repair. One notable breakthrough came in 2022, when a group of researchers used AI to reassemble portions of the life of Adam and Eve from different versions across Latin and Slavic manuscripts. Previously, these manuscripts didn't seem to match up, but the AI was able to detect linguistic patterns and common narrative structures that suggested they were actually telling the same story in different ways. By aligning those variants, scholars could finally reconstruct passages that had been missing for nearly 1,600 years. Even more impressive, AI wasn't just decoding letters, it was catching themes. In some cases, it noticed theological shifts and inconsistencies that pointed to later alterations by church scribes. For instance, in certain versions, Eve is portrayed with more agency, questioning divine commands, bargaining with spiritual beings. Earlier scholars thought these lines were corruptions, but the AI found that this portrayal was consistent in older layers of the text, suggesting it might have been edited out by later religious authorities. Another AI-assisted discovery involved the so-called satanic deception sequences, previously thought to be different events. The AI recognized a structure across 3 manuscripts where Satan takes on radiant, god-like forms to mislead Adam, not once, but repeatedly over time. This confirmed theories that the book wasn't a one-time event story, but a cycle of manipulation. Some researchers even used AI to map out the sequence of supernatural appearances in the Book of Adam and Eve, comparing it to ancient Sumerian myths and Enochian writings. What emerged was a strange web of similarities. When the text of an inscription is entered, Ithaca provides options for any missing words, along with probabilities for each guess. Beings descending in light, offering forbidden wisdom, only to twist reality around the humans who accept it. And here's the kicker. AI helped detect entire missing chapters based on thematic gaps and abrupt narrative shifts. Models predicted that certain key sections, perhaps dealing with the origin of these bright realm beings or the mechanics of Eden's spiritual geography, had been lost or suppressed. In 2023, archaeologists unearthed a manuscript fragment in northern Ethiopia that appeared to match one of these predicted gaps, a moment where Adam speaks of hearing multiple voices in the garden, some commanding obedience, others offering truth. This revelation has lit a fire under biblical scholars because now AI isn't just helping us recover history. It's forcing us to question who got to shape that history in the first place. The message isn't about sin, it's about surveillance. The traditional story of Adam and Eve has always revolved around one central idea: sin. They broke the rule, ate the forbidden fruit, and paradise was lost. Simple. But the Book of Adam and Eve, especially in its restored versions, reveals a far darker story. It's not just about one mistake. It's about constant observation, psychological manipulation, and influence from forces above and beyond. In this version, Adam and Eve aren't simply expelled from Eden, they're being watched. Not figuratively, literally. They speak of eyes in the sky, of voices echoing across the wilderness. They hide, not out of shame, but out of fear of being seen. Some scholars see these details as symbols of guilt, but others suggest something more sinister: surveillance. In the Latin Vita Adae et Evae, Eve recounts being shown terrifying visions of her descendants, suffering, dying, enslaved. But these visions don't come from God. They come from the deceiver in light. In other words, her tormentor isn't a shadowy serpent. It's a watcher dressed in purity. Someone or something is pulling the strings and forcing her to witness pain. These passages have inspired wild theories, some even suggesting that the garden wasn't paradise, but an experiment. Adam and Eve weren't expelled in anger, but because the trial had ended. They were pushed, observed, manipulated, and finally cast out. Supporting this idea is a recurring line in some JRE manuscripts. He who monitors the dust. Adam is formed from dust, and the tempter refers to observing him even before he came to life. That hints at planning, foreknowledge, and intention. In these texts, Satan doesn't arrive after the fall. He's already there, watching, scheming. The radiant beings aren't reacting to rebellion, they're provoking it. Time and again, Adam and Eve are offered truth, freedom, and knowledge, but only if they abandon their Creator. This isn't temptation. It's a psychological operation, a test of loyalty under constant, invisible pressure. Even more disturbing is the role of suffering. Adam and Eve endure fasting, starvation, hallucinations, and even self-harm, rituals reminiscent of ancient initiation ceremonies. But these trials aren't God's doing. They're clinging to hope that God is still watching, because by this point, they no longer know who is observing or why. The life of Adam and Eve also includes a controversial scene where Adam warns his son Seth that Earth is not what it seems. He claims there are beings who control the winds and observe the waters, and that one must not speak where the watchers roam. Some see this as early animism, while others view it as a form of ancient paranoia, a belief that even thoughts could be monitored. And that brings us to the most unsettling idea. Humanity's fall may not have been a crime, but a provocation. Eden may not have been paradise, but a controlled environment designed to test behavior under pressure. Some even link this to Gnostic thought, that the Creator was not benevolent, but a demiurge, a lesser power restricting spiritual beings like Adam and Eve. In this view, the serpent didn't cause the fall. He awakened them. These interpretations may sound fringe, but they are rooted in textual analysis. Scholars such as Andrei Orlov and Michael Stone have explored surveillance themes in apocryphal texts, and with AI restoring more lost works, these patterns are becoming increasingly clear. Perhaps that's the real reason the Book of Adam and Eve was hidden. Not because it contradicted the Bible, but because it revealed it. Why was it left out of the Bible? The question has haunted scholars for generations. If the Book of Adam and Eve was so widely preserved, copied in multiple languages, and even referenced in other early Christian writings, why wasn't it included in the Bible? The answer lies in a mix of politics, theology, fear, and something deeper that most never dare to touch: the need for control. To understand this, we have to go back to the chaotic early centuries of Christianity. Back then, there was no single Bible. Early Christianity was not a monolithic movement with a tidy, agreed-upon set of sacred books and beliefs. Far from it. Different communities had their own collections of sacred texts, some overlapping, many wildly different. In Alexandria, scrolls circulated that painted God as a remote architect. In Jerusalem, texts emphasized divine justice. And in the deserts of Egypt and Ethiopia, strange books like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Adam and Eve were read with equal reverence. It wasn't until the late 4th century that the Church decided it needed one unified narrative. That meant choosing which books to keep and which to bury. The Council of Carthage in 397 AD is often pointed to as the moment when the modern biblical canon began to solidify in the West. Church leaders debated which texts aligned with doctrine, which ones were too confusing, and which ones were outright dangerous. The Book of Adam and Eve didn't stand a chance. Why? First, its message was too weird. It didn't follow the clean, linear arc the Church wanted to teach: creation, fall, punishment, redemption. Instead, it spiraled into surreal scenes, cosmic beings, psychological torment, and spiritual ambiguity. Adam and Eve weren't just sinners. They were victims of something far bigger and more confusing than a snake and a tree. Second, the book leaned into themes that echoed Gnostic theology, a belief system the early Church worked hard to stamp out. Gnostics taught that the material world was a prison and that salvation came through secret knowledge, gnosis, rather than obedience. The Book of Adam and Eve doesn't go full Gnostic, but it shares striking similarities: celestial manipulators, hidden knowledge, and the idea that Adam and Eve's suffering had a greater, possibly redemptive, purpose. Even more threatening, the book presents a non-linear view of time. Adam sees visions of future generations. He experiences time loops. Some versions suggest that events in Eden were predestined, an echo of deterministic beliefs that challenge the Church's doctrine of free will and moral responsibility. If the fall was inevitable, how could humanity be blamed? But perhaps the biggest problem was this: the book raised questions without offering clean answers. It asked, who are these shining beings? Why are they testing Adam? Why does God seem so distant after the fall? Why is there so much pain in the world if all they did was make a choice? These are dangerous questions for an institution trying to teach faith through clarity, not confusion. The early Church needed order. This book delivered mystery, and mystery is harder to control. Today, that's exactly why it's being revisited. AI, academic freedom, and global digital libraries let researchers explore forgotten texts with fresh eyes. What was once dismissed as myth is now seen as a priceless window into early human imagination and spirituality. A kind of spiritual fossil preserving not just a story, but a mindset, a fear, a hope, a question. Was Eden a paradise or a trap? Was the fall a failure or the start of awakening? And most importantly, if we were being watched then, are we still being watched now? The Book of Adam and Eve doesn't answer these questions. It doesn't try to. Instead, it whispers. It hints. It dares you to look beyond the tidy pages of the modern Bible and ask, what else was left out? And more unsettling, why? And if forbidden texts like this exist, how many more are still hidden? Share your thoughts below, because this story is far from over. What if the truth was edited out on purpose